Welcome back, everybody. Today is an important video that I really don't think you're going to want to miss. We are going over the 2025 rookie wide receiver class, and I have created a database of all rookie wide receivers since 2015 that went inside the top 200 picks and put a grade on each of them after year one. I take into account the 5 best predictors of future fantasy wide receiver success at the position and weighted each of them just based on how good they are at predicting how good a player will be in the future. For example, these are the best wide receiver scores in the entire database. We got Puka, Malik Nabers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, all at the very top, all top high-end, high-value fantasy wide receiver assets. Now, what I use to get these grades is I use fantasy points per game. This makes up 35% of the grade. Yards per out run, 25% of the grade. First downs per out run is at 20% of the grade. This is my favorite metric, if I'm being honest. I just think it's such a great predictor. It's proven to be the best predictor of future fantasy wide receiver success in terms of just, between the margins. PFF grade is here at 15%. I know this one gets a lot of crap, but it has been known to predict wide receiver success in the past at a pretty good rate, especially when a player clears that 80 grade threshold. And lastly, we have targets per out run at just 5%. A little lower, but shows how efficient a player is on a per route basis and if they can earn targets in the offense. So let's dig into this 2025 class and see how they grade it out. I'm going to tell you if I'm in or out on some of these guys. I think this will surprise some people and really give them some good advice on if holding or selling some of these assets might be the best idea in Dynasty. Now let's not waste any more time and get this thing started. Now, a little bit of a surprise here as the wide receiver one in the database from the rookie class. Maybe not to some others, but Luther Burden. Obviously, his score is heavily skewed by how darn efficient he was. 2.69 yards per out run was the highest of the class. Led in first downs per out run, PFF grade, targets per out run to all the above there. So he was clearly very, very good when he was on the field and given the opportunity. Of course, we saw it down the stretch of the season. I think people are obviously going to be super excited about Burden going into year two. DJ Moore is probably going to be gone, whether he gets traded or he has a more scaled back role in the offense. And I just think the offense is going to run more through Burden, Loveland, and Roman Nudze going forward. Caleb Williams will have another season under his belt, and going into year three in his second season under Ben Johnson is just a cherry on top of it all. I could not be higher on the ceiling of Luther Burden, and I have already been very vocal about it early on in this offseason. A lot of people have. He is between a bunch of absolute studs everywhere you look in the database here. We got Drake London, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle. It's hard to argue his placement after year one and where he could climb into Dynasty this next season or, leading up to week one of the 2026 season. I love me some Luther Burden, and I think a lot of people do as well. While the upside comps are hard to ignore, I know I put him as the new Amon-Ra St. Brown or potentially the next Amon-Ra St. Brown in the thumbnail. I do think he has that ceiling 100%. But I do think it's a fair point to point out some downside scenarios where maybe his more limited sample size could be misleading. Obviously, one glaring name on here might be Christian Watson, a good NFL wide receiver, a good fantasy asset. But, they had similar rookie years. I don't think Christian Watson's a bad fantasy asset, but he's not one of these high-end assets that we hope Luther Burden kind of climbs to. He got really hot at the end of the season, like Luther Burden, and at the end of the day, he couldn't show that he, could carry that on into year two after his really, really hot year one where he ran hot on touchdowns. There's also a doomsday scenario, and I don't think this is going to happen, but Kadarius Toney is on here, and they have kind of similar profiles. I know Kadarius Toney didn't play the full season, so it's a little bit skewed that way as well. There's, for some context, but both were pretty wildly efficient. And they have a pretty big red flag in their profiles, and that is the fantasy point per game metric. They are the only two players in the top 30 that averaged below 10 points per game. Burden was 8.5, and Toney is at 8.2. This is something I do want to pay attention to, and I want to bake in as a small scenario where it could happen. He's in the range of outcomes. Even if I don't think it comes to fruition, it's good to point it out and gives maybe not get people off of Luther Burden, but to show that he's not a perfect prospect, and there is a scenario, there is a range of outcomes where he maybe not goes to, Kadarius Toney type of range, but maybe he's a Christian Watson and he's a good fantasy asset, just not a great one like we're hoping for. I am in no way trying to steer people away from Luther Burden. I love Luther Burden. I'm super high on him, but I want people to realize there are risks. There are risks to every profile. I mean, maybe except for the guys at the top. And it's important to take a closer look so that we can identify these red flags or possible downside outcomes. Maybe if you want to get off Luther Burden, if you want to capitalize on his value right now or where it could be here in a couple of months, I'm 100% in, obviously, on Burden. I think you should be buying this offseason anywhere you can. There are a few players in Dynasty that are ranked around the range that Burden is, that have the ceiling that he does, just point blank, period. I don't think anyone could really disagree or make a good argument against it. Maybe they can, but I haven't heard one thus far. He's attached to a great offense with a great coach, a great play caller. He has a quarterback whose ceiling is as high as anybody's as well, like Mahomes type of I think we saw it in the playoffs this past year. Caleb Williams is really, really good. The 2025 class didn't have, a generational type of asset like we saw last year with Malik Nabers. There is a lot of them that I like, and Burden is obviously warranted in all the hype and attention he's getting this offseason, and I think he should be valued that way. I just think, there are some downsides and errors, and we should acknowledge them, but at the same time, I think Luther Burden's a stud, and I think his grade in the database and the model shows that. Maybe the guy people thought would pop up as the number one wide receiver on this list, Tet McMillan. He comes in at number 2 here, just barely, Burden just barely out edges him, and there's no disrespect to him at all here. He had a really, really underrated rookie season, a really impressive rookie season. This was obviously validated. He was the offensive rookie of the year, deservedly so. He overcame a lot of limitations that came along with beating the Carolina Panthers wide receiver 1. This being, of course, Bryce Young's inconsistencies and the lack of weapons. Those are the two glaring points, things to point out. He finished first among rookies with 12.4 points per game. This is good for a top 24 finish. He was second in yards per out run, second in PFF grade, second in first downs per out run, third in targets per out run. So overall, very efficient, very, very solid rookie year for the 8th overall pick. The comparisons are about what you'd expect. I mean, they're pretty similar Burden. They're not too far off. He wasn't in the upper echelon of rookies that we've seen in the past, but he hovers around studs like T. Higgins, Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course. This is probably music to people's ears, especially Tet owners in general. There's a chance to take a big, big leap in year 2 and really push for like top 12 to 15 range in fantasy. This is of course assuming that Bryce Young fixes a lot of, the inconsistencies and puts up more performances like what we saw in the playoff game versus the Rams, where he just went completely nuts. I mean, Bryce Young is so hot and cold. You never know we're gonna get from him, but this is gonna be the key. 100% Bryce Young is just the Panthers offense in general. It will make the difference on whether Ted is able to achieve that type of ceiling, earlier or later on in his career. Regardless, though, I think the floor is super safe. He's super safe as a dynasty asset. He already showed that he can win on the outside. He can command a high, volume of targets as a rookie playing on the outside. I think that they start to move him around more, start getting the ball in easier ways. I think that ceiling or that floor can creep up even more than it already is. Just to acknowledge the downside of Ted, I don't really like doing this, but I don't think that these guys worry me too much about, what he could possibly turn into, but it's just worth mentioning. Chase Claypool, and I hate to pick on Christian Watson because he's a good wide receiver, but Chase Claypool's the guy that I'm referring to the most. I don't think either of these two were as talented as Tet. Tet was a first-round pick. He was a top 10 pick. These other guys were second and third round picks, or I believe second round picks, but they both ran hot on touchdowns in their rookie seasons, and that just was not the case for Tet. He was a guy who commanded a high volume of targets, and if you weren't high on Tet, I think this should give you some confidence to go out and acquire him. He just has such a safe floor and potential for an even higher ceiling, whether it's Bryce Young, if he takes steps forward, or it's another quarterback that they bring in and they try to, elevate the offense in a different way. This profile is as safe as it gets. I'm going to reiterate that all day long, and it's exactly why I love Tet McMillan in Dynasty so much, exactly why I'm in on him and why you should be buying. I just think he's an all-around really good player, and in Dynasty, he's as safe as it gets. The third guy on here, a pretty steep drop-off in terms of grade in the model in the database, but probably to nobody's surprise here, we got to make Puka. A tale of completely two different halves for him. He started off super hot, averaging 16.3 points per game from weeks 1 through 10. This dipped all the way to 6.8 points per game from weeks 11 to 17. During that span, he scored more than 9 points just one time. He was bad. This led to a lot of Egbuka's efficiency stats really falling off, and the sentiment on him has cooled since, he did the opposite of what most rookie wide receivers do. They usually start slow and end hot. Egbuka did the exact opposite, unfortunately. Even with all this information, though, I think there is more context that people need to realize. First, though, let's talk about some of the things he did really well. Second in points per game, he had 11.5 points per game. I know it was a steep drop-off, but still good as a rookie. Second in targets per out run at 23.5%. Both really solid numbers. Third in yards per out run, only trailing Burden and Tet in all of those metrics. Where things really start to tail off is when you look at the metric first downs per out run with him. Alarmingly low at 6.3%. This was 6th among the rookies, so not awful, but really just not what you want to see. His PFF grade was a little lower too, but then again, I take that one more with a grain of salt than I do yards per out run, first downs per out run, and just overall points per game with these guys. Egbuka, he's a tricky evaluation, and because on one hand, it's hard to ignore what he did in the first stretch of the season. He was a stud, but you also can't throw away the poor play down the back half of the season. His comparisons are a good indication, that projecting him isn't easy. He ranks close to, his current teammate and other round one guys like Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, Jordan Addison, but at the same time, he has some really, really worrisome players floating around his range, like Laviska Shenault, Xavier Worthy. I'm not calling him a bust yet, but still, at the same time, we're not impressed with Xavier Worthy. Traylon Burks is probably a worst case scenario for him. We all know we all learned our lesson from him. Maybe to give some context on why Puka's second half was so down, I mean, I think there was a combination of a lot of things about, Baker regressed a little bit. The offensive line was not good. There was lack of receiving weapons. The offense was just a mess, new offensive coordinator and all, but he sustained a hamstring injury in week 6 against the 49ers, and he didn't return in that game, but, everybody assumed that he was going to miss some time. The fantasy doctors assumed that he was going to miss at least probably 2 to 3 weeks. It was not one of the more mild ones, probably a little more on the serious side. He then returned the very next week, which was a surprise to everybody. Everyone thought he was going to be out, and this is where things really started to go downhill. Literally a direct correlation if you look at his stats over the course of the season. Of course, this was combined with Mike Evans coming back, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan really just clogging things up in that wide receiver room. And the injury as well just didn't help. And, I just think we should give Emeka Egbuka a little bit of grace on this one. This goes overlooked when a lot of people talk about his rookie year. And while I think other factors contributed to his drop-off, I feel like this one is, more or less not talked about enough more than anything. This is a harder one to project, like I mentioned earlier, but I really do have a lot of conviction that Egbuka is going to end up more in the higher end comps than the worst case scenario, like, other downside comps. I actually think his career turns out a lot like DJ Moore or his teammate Chris Godwin, who he was compared to a lot coming out of the draft last year. He has a lot of things you just want to bet on if you are looking for good long-term safe options in Dynasty. He's in a good offense. He's attached to Baker Mayfield. I trust the Buccaneers organization. They are a very, very competent organization. They're very smart. There's also a looming possibility that Mike Evans leaves in free agency. Chris Godwin also isn't getting any younger and is clearly not the same player, at least from what we saw last year after that broken ankle. He took Egbuka in the first round for a reason, and I cannot say that enough. He's your future at the wide receiver position. I know that Jalen McMillan is there, but when is the last time a Ohio State wide receiver, when has that pipeline really, really done you wrong? There's an argument for Marvin Harrison Jr., but he has still held value as a top 15, top 18 asset at the position. Egbuka, like Ted McMillan, is a safe bet. I think he's ranked a little bit high in terms of where he is on Keep Trade Cut right now, but I'm 100% in on the player, 100% in on the talent in the situation. And just going forward, I feel good about him. I can easily imagine a scenario where he finishes as a wide receiver 1 at least once in his career, but has that floor to be a sustainable wide receiver 2, kind of similar to what we've seen throughout Devontae Smith's career. Maybe the toughest evaluation that we have ever had or may ever have to make at the wide receiver position, that is going to be Travis Hunter. And this one brings me pain and no pleasure seeing him this low in the model, seeing the comps around him, because I could not have been higher on Travis Hunter coming out of last year's draft and rookie drafts and just dynasty in general. He was one of the better wide receivers that I've seen on tape in my short time of watching college prospects. I mean, he was a Heisman Trophy winner. The Drags traded their future first rounder to move up and to select them at number 2 overall. Liam Cohen was coming over from Tampa Bay to be the head coach and run the offense. We know all what he did, with the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield. He seemed like he was just destined for greatness, and it was going to be like a once-in-a-lifetime talent that may end up playing both sides of the ball, but at the very least, eventually becoming a full-time wide receiver if, things didn't work out on both sides. Instead, we got the worst-case scenario. Before finally seeing Hunter break out in Week 7, where he had 14 targets, 8 catches, over 100 yards, and a touchdown, the game we have been longing for all season long lasted just a couple of days. During the Jags Week 8 bye, it came out that during practice, he had sustained a knee injury and that would put him on IR, and eventually he would miss the rest of the season. This was then followed by the Jags trading for Jacoby Myers, extending him to a 3-year contract. And we saw the rise of Parker Washington, who thrived in the exact role that was meant for Hunter when he was selected with the number 2 overall pick. It doesn't even end here because we got direct quotes from GM James Gladstone that their goal for 2026 for Travis Hunter would be for him to focus more on the defense side of the ball. I mean, just when he thought that he was breaking out in Week 7, that he was going to, hit that peak or that second half of the year where he was going to break out and be kind of like, this in this league winner territory, like we see from a couple of rookies every year, we were hit with uppercut after uppercut after uppercut, especially the Travis Hunter, truthers out there like me. I am not saying this is a complete knockout punch for his future and that there's no hope for him, but man, this is as bad as it gets. And I think anybody who says otherwise is just lying to you. Even looking at his numbers from those 7 games, there is nothing to look at that gives me optimism outside of that Week 7 game. He had just 1.32 yards per out run, below a 20% at 19.1% targets per out run, a 62.7 PFF grade, an awful 5.3% first downs per out run, 9.1 points per game. If you look at his comparisons, it make it even worse. Denzel Mims, Mecole Hardman, Romeo Doubs, Cade Davis, Rashad Bateman, who was the first round pick as well. This is gross. The only player I see down here that gives me any hope at all, and it's JSN. That's like probably what everybody's going to look at when they see, the guy in the range of JSN. The thing is, JSN never had to worry about playing corner. Evaluating Travis Hunter and projecting his future might literally be impossible. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. And that's what makes me want to throw away this year altogether and just kind of focus on what they're going to do with him going forward. I've never had this type of predicament with a player before, and it's just so frustrating. It's so annoying that we have to deal with this because coming into the season, I would have never imagined this happening going into year two. Part of me wants to tell people to buy him just because of the talent that he is and what ceiling he could be in this Jags offense. I really, really loved what they had cooking this past year, but that would just be incredibly bad advice. And I don't think you can justify his wide receiver 26, ranking on Keep Trade Cut. He ranks ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, which is wild to me. He's also just behind guys like Zay Flowers and Devontae Smith. If you're able to get out on him and pivot to those types of players, I would do it right this moment. If you can, and everyone is trying to, offer a bunch of trash to you for him, which is kind of the offers I'm getting in a lot of my leagues, but just hold him. Please, please, please hold him at that price. Don't sell him just to sell him unless you are getting comparable market value back. I think the window to buy him, if anything, would be later on in the offseason and maybe into the 2026 season. He will drop, and I can almost guarantee that unless they come out and say that he's going to be playing wide receiver again and that he's going to focus on that and be, mostly a full-time player at the position. There will be a time, I think, to get back in on him and buy his stock. We want to get him in a range where his risk is as minimal as possible. At the moment, I'm just going to be out on Travis Hunter, and that hurts to say, that hurts to admit after just 1 year. But I do think there's a unique situation where we will be buying him back once he starts to lose, immense value, and we're able to get him in a range where the risk, like I mentioned, is way less than it is right now. Oh, Matthew Golden. I want to talk about him separately because he was a first round selection last year. Of course, we all know that, he kind of broke onto the scene, had that 40-yard dash, was selected by the Packers in the first round. He was like the first receiver they'd taken in many, many, many years. He is obviously holding a lot of value because of the draft capital that he got by the Packers that they spent on him. He's a very, very polarizing player, a very polarizing guy right now in Dynasty and just fantasy overall. I will come out quickly and say that there's two players that scored better than him in the model that I haven't talked about yet. We'll talk about them soon, but I know people will be curious about where, the sentiment is on Matthew Golden. And I just wanted to spend some time on him first before I got to the other guys. Let's not sugarcoat a thing about his rookie year. He was straight up disappointing, bad, however you want to put it. Kind of just gave us a whole lot of nothing. Just a whole lot of red in his profile. He had just 361 yards in 14 games. He failed to reach the one benchmark that kind of makes or breaks wide receivers, first-round wide receivers, that is, and the trajectory of their career in fantasy. If you hadn't noticed, he is highlighted in red, like a lot of those other guys. Take a look at the other players that are highlighted. These are the round one selected players. Let's see how many of these players went on to become useful fantasy assets. Mike Williams, and that's about it. Maybe Quentin Johnston, but seriously, is that the best case scenario we're hoping for? One other player has done it, and that's just the biggest red flag for me, and one that probably means you should stay away from him. I'm going to come out and say it right away, and we should probably be out on him after year one. Unfortunately, we already know the Green Bay wide receiver room is super crowded, and I have no faith that he's even better than Jaden Reed or Christian Watson, who put up numbers last year, and Matthew Golden did it, and who put up numbers in their rookie season. Unfortunately, something that Matthew Golden, once again, could not do. This brings me no joy to tell people to completely abandon ship because I love Matthew Golden. He's a Texas Longhorn. I'm a huge Texas Longhorn fan. I was just hoping one of him, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell could really hit in the NFL. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to wait. Maybe it's Cam Coleman this next year. Anyways, I'll get back. Let me get back to my point because I really do want to be in on Matthew Golden, but I can't ignore everything that I'm looking at, everything that I'm showing you guys. I know the film guys out there love him, but honestly, there are a ton of guys in the league that look great on tape. A ton of the guys, who just may not get the opportunity. And Matthew Golden got some opportunity this year. No production followed. And it doesn't mean anything if production, of course, does not follow if you're good on tape, if you are a good route runner. I'm often wrong, but Matthew Golden feels like a trap that anyone who is still holding on to hope is just falling for. And even if it's just after year one, I am completely out of Matthew Golden, and I hate to say that more than anything. Okay, let's circle back around to a guy who actually graded out better than Travis Hunter and Matthew Golden. I wanted to talk about the first round guys first, but let's talk about Jaden Higgins, the 34th overall selection in the second round by the Texans. Higgins had a fairly average year when you look at the numbers, but when you look at the full context and get a closer look at the other rookies that he compares to, it should make you more optimistic about his future fantasy outlook. He finished with 1.45 yards per out run. Solid, not great. Basically a 71 PFF grade, a good benchmark to clear. 7.7, almost 8% first downs per out run, solid as well. 18.5 targets per out run, solid, not great, but the only glaring hole in his profile is the overall points per game during his rookie year, which is below 8 at 7.6. This is something you'd like to be higher, of course, and it just will be something that I look really hard at when evaluating whether or not I want to buy into what he put on the field during his rookie season. So let's take a look at some of the guys that Higgins compares to best after year one. I want to start with the highest upside outcomes because that just makes people excited and it's fun to look at. I'm looking at Kenny Golladay and George Pickens, who are quite literally back to back to back. I think these outcomes are absolutely in the range of outcomes for him. All three guys were day two selections. Pickens, of course, a top six finisher in fantasy points per game this past season, was really, really good with the Cowboys. Golladay had like a really, really good 3-year stretch where he averaged between 13 and 15 points per game. I believe he was at least a wide receiver 2, if not a wide receiver 1 in one of those seasons in all three of them. The flashes were there for Higgins this year, and I think that there are some, realistic comps for Higgins that, could show that he has a lot of upside. Even if you're, more slightly doubtful that he reaches those type of heights, there are also some really, really nice, mid-range outcomes that are possible. I see Devontae Parker. It took him a lot longer to break out before, he had his 15 point per game season in year 5, but, he eventually got there. He was a round 1 guy, not a round 2 like Higgins, but after that, he was pretty much a 10 point per game guy, which is not what we're loving, but a solid dynasty or just fantasy asset in general overall. There's also Michael Wilson, just 2 spots below him. We all know how big of a breakout he was this past year when he was finally given the opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 in year 3. He made the most out of it. We, of course, don't know what the rest of his career looks like or what's going to happen this next season, but it just gives you a lot of confidence that betting on Higgins, he will at least have multiple peaks or highs where you can move off of him and not have to worry about him becoming completely obsolete after, a year or two. Even though I was a little hesitant of what Higgins was going to look like in the model, I do think I am way more in than out on him. There's a lot of good upside and medium range of outcomes that give me confidence that he has a chance to be a solid, safe fantasy asset while also having some high range comps that he can develop into as a receiver. The Texans improving on offense would really, really help this. CJ Stroud bouncing back would be something I would also look to correlate with the Higgins bet. I might be biased, but I am more bullish on Stroud settling somewhere in between the player he was during his big rookie year in 2023 and just what he was this past season, which was basically an above average NFL quarterback if you're kind of being nice about it. That middle ground would probably make him a top 15 quarterback at the worst. And I do think the Texans offense is going to be a much better unit in 2026. And I think Higgins probably follows suit and takes a promising year 2 leap that we're all hoping that he does. I'm going to pair 2 guys together here who actually ranked higher than Matthew Golden and finished behind the top 5 guys in the class. And that's going to be Seahawks wide receiver Torrey Horton and Texans wide receiver Jalen Noel. Not the biggest names, but 2 guys that I think you should be familiar with or get yourselves more familiar with if you're looking for some, sleepers in this class. Noel was a round 3 selection by the Texans, and Torrey Horton was drafted in, I believe, the 5th round on day 3. These 2 prospects were a couple that I was pretty high on coming out of school, especially Jalen Noel coming out of Iowa State. I was pretty happy when the Texans took him. Torrey Horton was a more under the radar guy, I believe, out of Colorado State. And Matt Harmon is a guy that I really look at for wide receivers, and he really liked him. So that's what captured my attention for him. Both were also like the 3rd, 4th wide receivers on their respective teams. So, not a lot to look at this year, but when given the opportunity and the snaps this year, both were actually quite good in their appearances. Horton was looking like he was on the verge of a breakout in week 9. He had 21 fantasy points and 2 touchdowns before he landed on IR the very next week. He wasn't even seen the rest of the season, unfortunately, including the Seahawks run to the Super Bowl. Didn't see him at all. Jalen Noel was a slightly different story. He was super efficient on a route-to-route basis really early on in the season before getting an increased role like in weeks 7 and 8 when Nico Collins was injured. In those 2 games, he had 9 catches on 13 targets for 140 yards. He clearly showed some signs of being a quality slot player, but unfortunately the Texans prioritized Christian Kirk, who did absolutely nothing all year long, instead of their talented, explosive, and just better 3rd round rookie. For me, it's easy to squint and see these 2 becoming a quality, number 2, 3 wide receivers and decent fantasy assets for guys you can plug into your flex. For Horton, Cooper Kupp is clearly not even half the player that he used to be. He could take over that role as soon as next year. I would just be wary of the Seahawks bringing in another wide receiver in free agency or the draft. I know they traded for Rashid Shaheed, so maybe they retain him. I don't know exactly what they do. Similar with Jalen Noel, though, I can also see a world where he becomes the Texans' number 2 or 3 wide receiver. Unfortunately, the Texans seem to have no idea what they're doing on offense at times this season, and they don't really trust Noel to be a full-time player yet. I don't know if it's going to start or it's going to change in year 2. They have Tank Dell coming back, so make it a little bit crowded, but these guys are both cheap. That's a good thing about it. And they guard up pretty well, and their range of outcomes are pretty decent. And I think that they could have the potential to be decent fantasy assets or at least rise in value, a pretty significant amount here in the near future. Buying is probably the way that I would approach them more than anything, but more as a throw-in at this point, to be honest with you, because they're that cheap. We just have to see more going into year 2. And, I'm excited about what role they have, get them up, but I'm a little skeptical because they were later round picks. I know Noel's a 3rd round pick, but the Texans They have a little bit more of a crowded wide receiver room. In the Seahawks, we don't really know what they're going to do in free agency or if they're going to take a receiver in the draft. Okay, once again, we're going to be pairing two guys here, and I have two, unfortunately, pretty disappointing second round wide receivers. Chargers wide receiver Trey Harris and Raiders wide receiver Jack Besh, both taken just a couple of picks apart. Both did almost nothing in their rookie years, and as much as I want to be optimistic about them, it's hard to find a glimmer of hope in anything in their profile, especially when you look at what they did in year one. When you look at the closest comparisons of other day two prospects, you get a lot of Paris Campbells, Marvin Mims, Velus Jones, Andy Isabella, Brian Edwards, Kitcha Hamler, Sky Moore, all busts as, day two selections. I mean, there is nothing of substance that gets me excited or makes me think that either of these guys can turn it around. Harris is already in the middle of a crowded wide receiver room with the Chargers. He's got Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, and Rondé Gadsden to compete with. I mean, that's a big wide receiver room. I know they have Mike McDaniel coming in, but still, that's a lot of targets to compete with. Jack Besh definitely has a more clear runway to come out and turn it around in year two. There's just really Brock Bowers there, and that's it for the Raiders. I do think it's more of an indictment on him more than anything that he, had no competition in his rookie season in the Raiders receiving room, and he still couldn't give us anything to dream on going into year two. I feel bad telling people to abandon ship on two young guys. No model is perfect. Mine isn't, of course. And one of these guys, or maybe even both, could turn it around. You never know. Crazier things have happened. I just don't think it's smart to hold on to these assets at this point. A player's rookie year can tell you a lot about their future probability of becoming a useful fantasy asset. I think that's important to know, especially these day two guys. I think the best plan for each of them is to wait and to sell later. It's early in the offseason. Once training camp comes back around, though, you will start to hear coaches, coordinators, beat reporters start to talk about them, talk them up. Windows will open up for you to move them and capitalize on fantasy managers getting excited for the start of the season. There will be a lot of talk around these two teams as well. So I think there will absolutely be opportunities that open up for them. The Raiders just hired, of course, Clint Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. He was coming off a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. People will get excited about the role that Jack Besh could play in that offense. Is he going to be the JSN? You'll hear that. I almost can guarantee it. Just based on what he did with Seattle and what JSN, how big of a leap he had in year three. The same thing can be said for Trey Harris. Mike McDaniel just came in. It was the big hire of the offseason in terms of offensive coordinators. You will almost certainly hear chatter about what his role could be and kind of what the staff has planned for him in year two. Timing will be the best way to capitalize on the value of both Besh and Harris. Don't panic sell, though. Please don't. Be patient and wait for them to open up, wait for the windows to open up, and for people to get excited. To close this one out, I am out on both of them if you hadn't guessed. Unfortunately, their performance in their rookie year don't match up with what I'm looking for and with what I like to project going into year two as an asset in Dynasty. Okay, I'm placing three guys here who actually ranked higher than the day two prospects that I just talked about. Elik Iomanor, Pat Bryant, and Shamir DK. If I said all those names correctly, I hope I did, but both Titans rookie wide receivers here, and the Broncos third round selection, which was Pat Bryant. This range of guys is interesting, and I know they aren't exciting names whatsoever. Trust me. I do think that there is a silver lining of hope that, at least one of these guys can turn into something, maybe two of them. The one that intrigues me the most is Pat Bryant, who's a bit of a surprise as a round three selection last year for the Broncos. He went 74th overall, I believe, in the draft. While his rookie season doesn't look like anything crazy, I do see some names here near him that compare favorably to some, higher end outcomes if he does eventually hit that. You see Michael Gallup, Nico Collins, Alec Pierce. Obviously, the dream would be Nico. We have seen him be a wide receiver one over the last 3 seasons. While I do think that is possible, he could turn into Nico Collins. I do think he probably lands more in the ballpark of Alec Pierce or Michael Gallup. And I realize these aren't big names, but Pierce is about to get paid a lot of money here in a couple weeks. And Michael Gallup was a really, really good fantasy asset before his career was completely derailed with the injuries that he had with the Cowboys in Dallas. So if you own Pat Bryant, hold on to him, even look into buying him, see if you can get him as a throw-in maybe, see if you can just, sneak him in there somewhere. The Denver situation may not look desirable at the moment. Cortland Sutton, though, will be 31 this year, and there is nobody else in that wide receiver room that scares me. He also had some nice moments this season and showed some nice flashes. So, I have some optimism on him, and, I would not be opposed to buying him in Dynasty. You just hope that he stays away from those concussions because I believe he had maybe like 2 or 3 this season. Let's briefly talk about Iomanor and Shamir DK. I think at least one of these guys becomes fantasy relevant at some point, and if I had to make a bet, I might lean towards Shamir DK more than anything. He was the higher of the guys drafted by the Titans last year in the early 4th round. He scored lower than Iomanor just barely, but I like the role that he played last year as a big slot in this offense, especially with Brian Daboll coming in. Him and Cam Ward seemed to develop a nice chemistry, and he had some really, really nice ups. And the options in that offense are slim right now, so the opportunity will be there more than likely. I know it's just one name I see down here, but Khalil Shakir, also a slot guy who was a day 3 selection. Not a one-to-one comparison. They're very different sizes, of course, but Shakira's had a nice run out in Buffalo so far due to the lack of target competition, and I think maybe DK takes advantage of the same thing here in Tennessee for at least, maybe a year or two. You can capitalize on that value and the spike in value and trade him if you want to, hold on to him, whatever you'd like to do. With Iomanner, I'm just slightly less bullish. He showed some cool flashes in terms of commanding targets, early on in the season. But I don't think his skill set is as set up for success as DK's is. I don't think he's as toolsy. I think he's maybe just like a better real life wide receiver more than fantasy. He comps closely to, a lot of the guys that Pat Bryant and Jameer DK do. The only thing is, I am much less a believer in the talent, like I mentioned. Maybe someone can convince me otherwise. This isn't the strongest argument I've ever made for, from DK to Iomanner. I totally get it. It's just more of a gut thing when I'm lining up the numbers in draft capital, of the players that best match each of their profiles. Okay, let's quickly talk about Isaac Tesla, Jalen Lane, and Kyle Williams. 2 third-round guys in Kyle Williams and Isaac Tesla, and Jalen Lane, who was a 4th-rounder. I will be quick here because there isn't a lot to talk about. I mean, you look at the numbers, it's pretty obvious, but I don't think there was a ton of expectation for Jalen Lane and Isaac Tesla. Just specifically, Tesla was, he was a reach. He was an absolute reach taken in the 3rd round by the Lions. It was clearly malpractice, by the Lions by the Lions front office in selecting him and trading future 3rd round picks to come up and get him. But Jalen Lane was buried on the depth chart. I don't blame him. He was another prospect that was just a little more below average than anything. Kyle Williams, though, easily the most disappointing one. He walked into a wide receiver room with little to no competition. Only a 32-year-old Stephon Diggs coming off a torn ACL with, he was the only one with guaranteed playing time. Williams failed to find any playing time in the rotation, over guys like Demario Douglas, Mac Hollins, Kayshon Boutte. Say what you want about him, and he showed some flashes at points this year, but this is not a good sign, especially going forward as a dynasty asset. I don't even want to say some of the names near these guys: Trey Palmer, Tyler Johnson, Devin Duvernay, Miles Boykin. It's barren, and I don't really think any of the 3 amount to much of anything in terms of having, value as a fantasy asset or dynasty in general. I liked Kyle Williams coming out. I really, really liked him coming out of the draft, but his rookie year gave me little to no confidence moving forward. Fortunately, the same can be said for both Isaac Tesla and Jalen Lane. Okay, to end this off, we got Dante Thornton and Arian Smith. Let's just make this quick. Please do not try to be buying any of these guys, unless it's maybe a throw-in, sure, but Arian Smith was the 2nd worst player according to the model ever. Dante Thornton is right there with him. Sure, one of the guys that, they could beat the odds and come close to is Kayshon Boutte. He's about the only guy that has. But are you really holding out hope for a guy like Kayshon Boutte, or for them to turn into a guy like Kayshon Boutte? I don't think so. Come on now, let's be real. I'm completely out on both of these guys. It's gross. Their rookie seasons were bad. I don't think they're good prospects at all. Malpractice by the Jets for taking Arian Smith in the 4th round. I don't think Dante Thornton's a bad prospect, but I don't think his skills are best used for fantasy, and definitely not going to be a guy who's going to be having or holding any sort of value in dynasty. So I'll be nice. I won't say anything more. I'm out on both of these guys, and I think you should be too. All right, that is going to be it for today, guys. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if some of the guys were higher or lower in the model than you might have thought. Let me know who you're in or out on. If you're in on a guy that I'm out on, let me know why. And, just help sway my decision. Help me, get a different perspective out there, because, of course, there's always a range of outcomes where these guys can succeed, especially if they had bad rookie seasons. We've seen it a couple of times in the past, and there are outliers. But like always, thank you again for coming, and I will see you guys next time.